Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. I'm very excited about today's guest. He was around in what I feel was one of the best times in high school football, 1990 to 1992. Tremendous two-year starter for Ansonia both ways. All state, all area, all NVL. He did it all. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mark Gesner. And Mark, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So, Mark, let me ask you, what was the first memory you had of Ansonia football as a young kid?
My first memory of Ansonia football was actually against Derby. I actually grew up in Derby for a little bit. My family bounced around back and forth from Ansonia. So I remember at one point going to Ryan Field to watch Ansonia Derby play. I used to live over by the old police station. So I remember actually at times the parking was tough back then. So I remember walking to the game. And
Right.
that was an adventure too. So I actually remember that was my first experience, was actually going to an Ansonia Derby game. So that was it all started from there. I got a real sense of what it was like and how intense it was and how the fans got into it from a young age. I must have been in early elementary school at that point.
Right. And let me ask you, when did you obviously played Pop Warner? When did you first start playing Pop Warner, would you say?
I started when I was 9 years old, when I moved to Ansonia. I remember my first memory was going to a Derby Papa Warner practice behind the old Ryan Field. I went to Irving School for a while. I made some friends that I actually, ended up playing against. And then I moved to Ansonia about 4th, 5th grade, and I started playing Papa Warner there when I turned 9 years old.
Right. So, Mark, you obviously didn't start playing Pop Warner until you moved to Ansonia, but I know it's got to be a little strange sometimes when you go from Derby, where you lived, and then you move to Ansonia. I always think of people like, Jason Lightham, Jeff Gregorio. These guys grew up in Derby, then they went to Ansonia High School. Now, even though you went to Ansonia by like 4th or 5th grade, was it a little weird at first to root for Ansonia after growing up in Derby a little bit?
Well, I actually started off in Ansonia. So I went to Ansonia schools in kindergarten. And then I think I went to Derby from, 1st to 3rd grade, became good friends with some, and then I moved back to Ansonia. So yeah, it was a little different. And then, as you got a little bit older into high school and the rivalry got a little bit more intense, and time passed, but it was still fun. I used to go to some birthday parties and things afterwards and kind of go back and forth. So it was good memories. It definitely added to it. I know I was joking as I got older, what it would have been like if I stayed on the other side, wearing red.
Yeah. So let me ask you, was football obviously your number one sport when you were a young kid, or would you say like you gravitated more towards like baseball or basketball? What was like your top sport as a young kid?
As a young kid, probably baseball.
Yeah.
I felt, I was probably a little bit better in baseball when I was younger. I was small, kind of skinny, but I really fell in love with baseball until I kind of got to high school and I started to experience kind of the emotional aspect of playing football and kind of the intensity and the camaraderie of the locker room and everything else that went into it. So I was actually planning on playing both in college, but after my freshman year in football, it was pretty intense and a lot of workload that I ended up not playing, which is definitely one of my biggest regrets. But I started off a true baseball fan. I still love baseball to this day.
Right.
I was a 3-year starter in baseball, so I actually was probably a little bit ahead in baseball. But then I just fell in love with football from there because, like I said, everything to do with it, from the teammates, the camaraderie, the locker room, everything that leads up to it.
Right. And now let me ask you, Mark, your first year playing Pop Warner, number one, do you remember who the coaches were? And number two, what position did you play your first year?
My first year, I played the bench. No, we had great coaches. Kevin Raleigh, Terry Golson, Coach Brian, Coach Bear. The list goes on and on. And they were a big part of the program and kind of followed a lot of up through the ranks into high school. So there was always that familiar face, the same system, the same coaches, the same expectations. So it started real young. So, lot of people looked up to, NFL players back in the day, but I know a lot of us young kids looked up to the high school kids, and, even playing in the street, people were pretending that they were Deion Sanders or whatever, but we were the Ansonia high school players playing in the street when we were young.
Right. And, Mark, sometimes people, that first year they play football, they're not sure they want to go back to it because it's always a learning year. And it's also, at times it could be confusing. It could be hard. I mean, was there ever a doubt your first year that you would return?
Did you hear a story about this? Because to this day, Coach Bradley, if I see him, he's still, I was 9 years old, and, I was a pretty good street football player, pretty good. I was probably All-American two-hand touch when I was younger. But then you got to, when I turned 9 years old, you put your pads on, you got to play your dues a little bit. And there was a point in camp where I actually went, and I said, what, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'll focus on baseball. And I ended up going and turning my equipment in. And my mom was like, are you sure you want to do this? And when we were driving around down the street, I think we got from Nolan Field to about where Extra Mart was. And I was like, Ma, you got to turn around. I want to go back. And I went back, and the rest is kind of history as far as football being a huge influence in my life. So who knows what that would have been, but that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made.
Right. Mark, I don't think it matters whether it's varsity, JV, freshman, Pop Warner. That first time you get to play in a Derby Ansonia game, it's special for any kid. So just talk about your first year of Pop Warner getting to play against Derby. That had to be really exciting for you. And I'm sure, I think it worked that way in Derby and it worked that way in Ansonia. A big reason, you play your season is because you always know that game's coming around the corner.
Yeah. I mean, I had real fun. I think thinking back on it, I think we were like 2-2. I think we split in the 4 years I played. I think my first year we won. We went undefeated that year. We went pretty good team. We went up to Rhode Island to play in some postseason. And then I came back, and I definitely remember having some good battles against, I think Joey Bevins had a good squad back then. And I remember the Derby, they wore the towels with the skulls on them. That was, so I had some fond memories. I remember sitting on the bus in front of Osborndale, just the anticipation of the game as a kid. I remember that vividly. Some good memories, going back and forth with Derby. That's really where the rivalry started, because it was back and forth year after year. We kind of traded shots back and forth.
Right. And, the thing of it is, too, Mark, I'm sure you remember this. I remember when I was a kid, like, if you saw a Derby kid or you saw an Ansonia kid in the store and they're wearing that jacket, you automatically just make eye contact, because I think it's drilled into your head that that's the person you dislike, at least when football is going on. So you kind of always, pay attention to that more. So, and it was kind of rare when you did see somebody, that wasn't from Derby in the Derby store. Same thing with Ansonia. So I'm sure that you remember that as well.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of red in my closet growing up, mostly blue. But yeah, you're going back and forth. You would go to your McDonald's with your family, and I'm sure, the Derby kids would come to Dutchess with their families, and it would be a little different experience, especially as you got older. But yeah, it was something. It was definitely a special rivalry. Valley football in general is something different. I think that the players, the fans, just cut from a different type of cloth.
Right. So let's switch gears just for a moment, Mark, and talk about baseball briefly. You played for Coach Vaca, a tremendous coach, coached, I think, 40 years at Ansonia. And I mean, that program was always right there. It was always in the tournament. He always produced good pitchers. Just talk about playing for Coach Vaca in those 3 years that you started for Ansonia baseball.
Well, Coach Vaca, he really stressed fundamentals. I think from the day practice started, routine and fundamentals, I think that's something that stuck with me in general, not just baseball, football, kind of in life is the repetition and, the consistency in the fundamentals and how important that was, and how, in crunch time, you can really just kind of rely on your fundamentals. Coach Vaca was, an intense coach, but he was, really fundamentally sound. He knew what he was doing. He had a game plan. And as you know, he executed it year after year. He started, in the Little League. He would come to the Little League games and kind of, coach you up a little bit, even during the Little League. And it, carried over to Babe Ruth. And he was a huge part of, Ansonia baseball, which I know still carries on today with Coach Lynch. And that whole, whether it was baseball or football, the consistency of coaching was there year after year. And I think that really helped both programs.
Right. And, I think, Mark, I want to say you were probably in ninth grade when they won their state title, maybe eighth grade. But, they finally win that, state title. It was a big year. Pelotowski was tremendous for them, Sharkey, all those guys.
Yeah.
As a freshman, seeing them win, it had to, get you really pumped up to play not only high school football, but high school baseball as well.
Yeah. Like I said, baseball was probably my first true love since I was a young kid. And, I looked up to those guys just like I looked up to the, the football players. They were tremendous, solid baseball players. It's amazing some of the previous athletes that Ansonia has produced in baseball and football. And I think it's, a testament to the coaching and a testament to the fans in the city and the support that they give you, no matter what, sport or season it is. It's just year after year. The consistency is really important, and I think benefits, the programs.
Right. So, Mark, let me ask you, by the end of eighth grade football season, were you confident enough that you had, gotten the necessary tools that would help you along the way when you got to high school? Were you confident going into your freshman year that you were going to be a player?
I thought I was, but I was pretty light back then. It was, the rules have changed a little bit. I was pretty light growing up, so I never even made it to midgets. I made, I think I played 3 years of Pee-wees, and then I went to junior midgets.
Midgets, yeah.
I think going into high school, if I think back, I think in eighth grade, I weighed like 82 pounds. And then my freshman year, I weighed 102 pounds. I remember this. And it was quite an experience going from, tackling junior midget kids with weight limits to my freshman year. Then all of a sudden you have like Jason Iverson and those type of kids coming downhill on you. So it was a wake up call. Had to learn to go in a little bit lower than I did when I was in Papa Warner. So it took me a little time to adjust physically. The game was definitely faster. I had to take a couple lumps here and there, gave up some touchdown passes, but I think that it kind of made me focus in on what it took and what you had to do physically and mentally to kind of compete at the level of Ansonia Derby, Valley football in general. So I definitely, and it was, again, a life lesson. Same thing I try to teach to my kids is, you have to pay your dues. You have to wait your turn. You have to put in the work and the quote unquote, you have to trust the process because it's actually true.
Right. So, Mark, freshman year comes and, I think what was really helpful for your group of kids and so many is you had Coach John Sponheimer, who's been the freshman coach forever. And at that point, he had already put in about 16, 17 years. You also had Steve Pepler, I believe, as the assistant. Yeah. So, you had great coaching, not only in Pop Warner, but now freshman year, you have really two great coaches coaching in. Spoony, to me, I've seen him over the years. The guy's a genius when it comes to football. He really is. So just talk about freshman year a little bit.
Well, I know if we were talking about Papa Warner coaches, I know I now that I'm thinking about it, I left out Earl Stanley, and I know Earl Stanley was pivotal, for all of us kids growing up through Papa Warner, and definitely was a familiar face going into freshman year. So yeah, right. That was like, to me, that was going to the major leagues because now you're up there with the coaches that you've been watching, and they're bigger than life. They're both Coach Hunt and Coach Spooney are pretty large individuals. So looking up to them was a whole different world. But they brought a certain, again, like intensity to it and seriousness. And there was a time to play, and then there was a time to be serious. But they had high expectations, and you had to live up to those expectations because if you didn't, they would let you know. Along with the cities as well. So I think it was really, fundamentally sound. Again, I think that was something that they stressed just in general was, if you're fundamentally sound and you heart was a big word back then, and you played with heart, then you probably come up on the winning side for the majority of the time. But again, great coaches, great consistency over the years, and definitely, like you said, Coach Spooney, again, still going at it, still pivotal after all these years, so he brought a certain expectation, certain coaches, you had to live up to that level. He pushed us all. So I have nothing but respect for those guys.
Right. And, Mark, I touched on it a little bit, how important Pop Warner was to Ansonia's success, because that's where it starts. Yeah. Also equally important to Ansonia's success, and I really believe this is that KO club that was around for years by, Bubba Green, who just was a tremendous person and did so much for Ansonia kids, especially the football players. Just talk about the KO club a little bit and, Bubba, because he was, a fixture in Ansonia.
Yeah. Well, I think, unfortunately, that's what's missing from a lot of kids' lives these days is that type of opportunity to be involved with something at the KO club. Give you something to do, positive people to be around, not just football related, but, on a Tuesday in December when you want to go play ping pong or get your hair cut, lift some weights, Bub was cooking, watching film. It goes on and on. I think, again, it just goes back to the camaraderie and the spending time together and those relationships that were made in the off season, kind of just carried over to the season. I think that's another thing that, Ansonia being such a small town, Derby being such a small town, the Valley schools being small, is that you were able to develop those more, close, intimate relationships with each other, with peers, with coaches, with your friends, families, and parents who drove you back and forth to practice. So the KO Club was pivotal and just provided an opportunity for everybody to get together, like in a safe environment, where you can do all different things from sports to just hanging out, to watching film, to cooking, to playing cards. I worked on my ping pong game, my spades game, set back, all different types of things over there. So that was a great opportunity, and that's something that I know that we all still think back upon and really probably cherish those. Even going to the game, looking up and seeing Bub's name in the filming booth. Even watching the games, you would look up and you would see the same familiar faces up there year after year. Bub filming all the games. I still hear him fart. You hear that accent on your name. So nothing but good experiences and good memories there as well, and just how pivotal that was. And I wish other kids had the opportunity to kind of experience some of those same things. I even had my son now is a freshman at Plainville High School, and the coach there is Tim Shea from Naugatuck. And I know the other day he said he had my son come up to me and said, "Hey, coach wanted me to ask you about the KO club." And I was like, "Well, you'd be so lucky to have a KO club." So I think the legend of the KO club, still lives on in a lot of our memories.
Right. So, Mark, let's talk about this. Your first spring practice going into your sophomore year. And, Parrish Edwards used to joke a lot, when he had finally graduated high school, he had told the, returning classmen, when you're doing those hills the first day of spring practice, I want you to think of me, when you're doing all the sprints. So, I mean, right away in springs, they always use that as like a conditioning part of football as well. But just talk about your first spring practice in Ansonia. And I mean, little intimidating for a kid who's a sophomore, or were you confident and you didn't think about that much?
Again, definitely. I mean, look at the players that I walked into, my sophomore year. Yep. We were loaded, and we were really talented. And that was another year I paid my dues my sophomore year. I was the scout team running back that usually, played the role of the other team's best players. So I took the wrath of the defense on a daily basis up there. But I remember my first memory was we had something that was called the 12-minute run, where you just run as fast as you can, as long as you can for 12 minutes. And that was one of my fond memories. That in doubles and triples. I think the rules have changed a little bit over the years. Practices aren't as intense, aren't as long, aren't as physical. So I have good memories. I remember in between the practices going to, going swimming at somebody's house and then coming right back to finish practice and then doing that again with special teams. So, that was a shock. Again, I think it just led you to realize how much work you had to put in, how intense it was, and how the competition around you was just, was really good. The people I played with and looked up to above were really, really good ball players. So I really had to pay my dues over the years.
Right. And, talented group of kids. You just touched on that, especially Kevin Sharkey, who was a tremendous two-way starter, Dennis Tinney, Duncan Del Volpe, Carl Barrett. I mean, so many.
Sean Thomas, Robbie Clark.
There's Rich Lester as quarterback. I mean, you just had so much talent on that team. And what was interesting, Mark, is you guys kind of started off, where you struggled the first couple games, but you found a way to win. And that was the thing about that 1990 Ansonia team. I mean, they lost one game all year, but they found ways to win, and they got better as the season went on.
Yeah.
And by the time Thanksgiving came, they really controlled that Naugatuck game on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that was a lot of coaching. I remember the big adjustment for that game was Coach Hunt had everybody widen their splits out and kind of. I remember Naugatuck was really big and really physical, and I remember that they thought if we can open them up a little bit and give our backs a little bit more room to work, it would be to our advantage. And I think that's definitely what happened. So, we had some talent, but we definitely had some coaching involved in that as well. That was a great season. I remember, a couple memories I had from my sophomore year that I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of playing time, but it was kind of my introduction. The first one was the Derby game. I remember my sophomore year being in that small locker room underneath with the dummies right next to you. You could hear a pin drop, and all you can hear upstairs was the cleats on the floor, that click, 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 click. And I remember looking down and literally seeing the hair on my arms standing up. And I knew I wasn't going to play, but I was still just so pumped up for that game. That really was one of the first introductions of how serious, intense the rivalry was. And then same thing that Thanksgiving game. I knew I wasn't going to get much playing time then, but to me, I was ready to go. Like it was my senior year, or it was the Super Bowl. I remember how intense those particular games, my sophomore year, and how amped up we were to play those games. Really good memories, and really kind of would literally get the blood circulating.
Right. And, Mark, I'm sure, seeing the crowd like you saw at that Derby game that day as a sophomore. And, Mark, that's the one thing that I think hurt that rivalry too. Obviously, Derby, has struggled the past several years. Yeah. But I also think what really hurt that rivalry is they stopped playing on Saturdays. And I really think that's something that, in my opinion, was a mistake, whoever decided to do that, because Friday night to me is not the same as a Saturday Derby Ansonia game.
Yeah, the 10:30 game starts were pretty awesome. You had to wake up early. The field was still wet. You had dew on the field. It was everybody had their coffee. Like I said, even when I was a little kid, that 10:30 game where you had to walk because there was no parking space. So you had to park miles away, and then everybody was walking together with their coffee. So you're right. Those are the things that I think are missed on the Friday night compared to the Saturday morning games, kind of like grass and turf. Now everybody back in the day wanted to play on turf all the time. Now everybody has turf. Now everybody wants to play on grass when you have the opportunity to. So I think the Friday night games have turned up a little bit. Even that happened to us our senior year when we usually play, on we play on Thanksgiving morning, but we got rained out. So we had to play, that Friday night game. And it was just a little different vibe than waking up for that 10:30 a.m. start. But I think that was that also brought a little special, flavor to the games, was that early morning start that's probably is missing because everybody else has different things to do on Friday nights compared to that Saturday morning.
Right. So now junior year, Mark, you obviously see the field a lot. And, the junior year team was just, to me, one of the most underrated teams. And, Mark, I always look at that Seymour game one, because so many players were cramping up that day for you guys. It was a tough game. Everybody was cramping up, and you guys still found the way to win that game 14-7. And that just told me, number one, how good the coaching is, but number two, how good these athletes are, because you guys really were hurting that day, and you found a way to gut it out and win that game. Yeah,
I remember, one of the first plays of the game, or early in that game, Jason Tinney took a shot to his ribs that broke his ribs. I think he played the rest of the game with some broken ribs. But that was just a testament to the people that was around me and the coaches. Is like you said, I think Ansonia football in general will find a way to win. The majority of the time. I think we even kind of, take that for granted sometimes about how difficult it is to win all the time, especially the Ansonia. Even to the kids these days, the pressure to win every game, even currently, is tough. And I give the kids a lot of credit because they are under a lot of pressure to be perfect week in and week out, year in and year out, not just the players, but the coaches and the community itself. So,
Mark, one thing that, to me is all you need to know about the Derby Ansonia rivalry is, and, it was a friendly rivalry. And I think even the coaches that year had a picnic to kind of get the
going into our senior year.
Yeah. To let them know that, it's a game, but when the game is not being played, we don't want you guys fighting or not getting along. But, there was always like a little friendly game of chess between both programs. And I know your junior year, when you guys went into that Derby game, you had a lot of motivation. I think the one motivation you guys had was they had done a Derby highlight tape that year when they won their state title. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys were a little irked because they showed Ansonia twice on the highlight reel, and that was kind of motivation going into that game. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really need much more motivation than the game itself. And I know the year before, we had, like I said, that was one of the. It's crazy playing for Ansonia. You think that you would remember, the games that you won, and you can. But I can remember just about every single play of the ones that didn't go our way, and that was one of them. And that one was hurtful. It was amazing that Derby, I think, won undefeated and won the championship that year. The year before we had done the same thing. So like you said, that was, leading up to that third and fourth years, the rivalry was probably, not at its peak because it's been going for, decades, but it was pretty intense at that time. So it did lead up to that. It was definitely something in the back of their mind. And we were, I'd say 100% focused going into that junior year game. Definitely.
Right. So Mark, let me ask you about Coach Hunt. And, I got to know him years and years later, after I was out of high school. And I just loved being around him. We would always talk about, Derby, Ansonia. What a great guy. But I'll tell you, on the field, he was intense sometimes. And one thing was for sure, you guys had to be on your game. He was not going to settle for anything less. So just talk about Coach Hunt a little bit.
Coach Hunt, I think he was a pivotal to a lot of people's lives in developing, young men, kids into men. Even after, years gone, some of the things that I think about, it didn't even set in when I was that age. I was young and dumb at that age, and the things that he tried to instill in us in the program in general, I think he kicked in as we got a little bit older. But Coach Hunt was just, physically imposing, but also really supportive, really intense. Another one who stressed fundamentals, and you really just didn't want to let him down. I think there was just a respect and just looking up, literally looking up to him since the time we were young. Just his presence on the sideline, his presence in the locker room. You didn't want to get yelled at him, but it was pretty inevitable that he was going to yell at you. But the times that you see him barking on the sidelines, but you don't see him. At least some of us, pull you to the side afterwards in the locker room or during films or something like that, and give you the little softer side of him, the little joking side of him. But Coach Hunt was a figure that meant a lot to the town and to the program, from the time he was a player to an assistant coach to the head man in charge. A lot of good memories of Coach Hunt that I'm sure most Ansonia football players, fans, parents, we all have, and there's a reason that the practice fields is named after him. And I think he'll go down as a coaching legend, and just a really good guy.
Right. So, Mark, let me ask you, you played both ways. And, a lot of people I ask, they'll say they probably like defense better because you could tackle, you could hit. But you played both and you were very good at both. Which one did you enjoy playing more, receiving or defense? And the other question is, what are some of the big highlights that stand out to you as a player the most?
Oh, the offense-defense question is a tough one. I'd have to say, you kind of like them equally. Depending on who you were playing against. I mean, if there was another receiver on the other side of the ball, then you probably kind of enjoyed, the defense part of it. And if the other team had a good defense, then maybe you enjoyed the offensive part of it. I think it changed week to week. I know even in college, I would politic to try to get in on some nickel defense in college, but they weren't really hearing it quite often. As far as highlights, growing up, you talking about Ansonia football in general, or
you as a player, some of the big games that you had.
Like the games the games I didn't even play in. So the sophomore year game against Derby, sophomore year against Naugatuck. But I remember, junior year against Naugatuck. Then my senior year, the game against Shelton, there was a big build up to that. And like you said, we were kind of slept on a little bit. We lost a lot of people every year. So the new younger kids kind of stepped up. So I think the Seymour game, they picked against us. The Shelton game, they picked against us. The Sacred Heart, I remember, it was a pretty good battle. I had a pretty good kick return to kind of spark things going there. the Shelton couple interceptions. I mean, it was a group effort. It was a team effort. So not so much thinking about some of the things. I know we talked a little bit about, I do remember my junior year, though, up in Naugatuck on the grass field when everybody was standing up on the hill. I do remember catching a fade for a touchdown from Rich Lester in the corner and just looking up and seeing everybody standing on the hill back when the games were packed. That's definitely a memory that will stick with me for a long time. Just a lot of memories, a lot of team memories, a lot of locker room memories, just in general.
Right. Mark, I don't want to talk necessarily about the loss, but talk to me about that crazy Holy Cross game in the mud that night, because, I mean, both teams really struggled to, handle the snaps. And, it totally took your running game out that night. It really did. Just talk about playing on, conditions like that. In hindsight, I mean, the other team, Holy Cross had to play too. I understand that. But in hindsight, do you think that game should have been postponed?
Well, you know what? Of course, at the time, you want to play. You want to play regardless of what the weather is. I don't know if there's any football player out there that wants the game to be postponed. But I think, it might have played to their advantage a little bit more. They were physically coming downhill, running team. We had, Jason was more of a scat back. We threw the ball a little bit. And we played on a baseball field. That didn't help us too much. Who knows? Might have been a little bit different if the field was turf at that time. But both, like you said, both teams have to play, and it was a disappointing loss. I know Greg Soldier has a picture just walking off the field, just in mud. That kind of says it all. That's kind of how we felt. Really disappointing loss, and one that sticks with you. Like I said, unfortunately, you probably remember the losses a little bit more than the wins sometimes, and that's one that definitely hurt us. Threw us off track a little bit. We bounced back against Naugatuck. And then you kind of ran into a pretty good New London team. But I definitely think that kind of threw us off a little bit. And who knows if the game was pushed back a day or two, what would have happened. But, that's why they played the games. And, both teams had to play that day. And unfortunately, Holy Cross got the best of us that day. But we got them back twice the next year. So a little payback.
And the unfortunate thing, Mark, about that 91 team, I think about the seniors, Esther, Clark, those guys. They won 11 games. And you know what? Probably not many people remember that team because sometimes it's like you said, the losses kind of stand out. But a team that went 11-2 beat Derby, Seymour, and Shelton and Naugatuck. That's a pretty damn good year.
That was a great team. Those, my freshman team, we were outstanding. We won number one in state that year. My sophomore year, we had that one loss to Derby, had 3 touchdowns called back, I believe. That one hurt. Derby went on to win the whole thing. That team was outstanding. My junior year, that team was so I was blessed to play with such skilled players and great teams. And like you said, bounce here or there, things might have been a little bit differently. But I have nothing but respect for the guys I played with, and admiration, and just really talented football players and good guys, and great coaches. And it really is an honor to even be involved in some of those games, win, lose, or draw with the Ansonia uniform on your back.
Right. So let's talk about senior year, Mark, because, again, I look at your team and I look at Derby's team, Dave Ann Roman's team, and I look at 2 teams who were probably picked not to do much that year. They lost a lot of guys. You guys obviously had your key runners in Press and Tinney coming back. Yeah. But, you had to go with a first-year quarterback in Dave Pacheco. And, there were some, sophomores that you had to play that year, David Sisto, Billy Sisto even played a little bit, Ronnie Tate. So it was a young team. But the thing about your team, your senior year, is you guys would always bend, but you would never break. And, it started with that Holy Cross game. I think Jason went out the second play of the game. He got hurt. And you guys really had to grind that game. I think it was a 14-13 game. But I think pulling that game out, I think Parrish Edwards had a big touchdown. I think that really helped you guys. Talk about that game a little bit. Yeah,
that was, again, I think that one was kind of coming off the previous years against going back and forth with Holy Cross. I think, Pete Diatalevi, and I don't know if he played my senior or junior year, but I remember Todd Bennett was a handful coming downhill. So they had a good team, a really solid team, and they were, up the street from the NVL. So they were, hard-nosed, disciplined, tough team. And we exchanged, back and forth. I actually remember, being back on the extra point and hearing that sound, boom, that rattled. I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the extra points went off the upright.
Yeah.
And I to this day, I was standing right underneath it. It was one of the best memories of sound memories I can remember was that ball hitting that upright and that dong, and coming right back at me. So yeah, that was that, and then we got to do it again later in the year. So I think that was pretty fitting that first game was close and that we were able to do it again later in the year. But yeah, like you said, that catapulted us kind of moving forward.
Right. And then, Mark, of course, Shelton, that came right down to the wire. But again, you guys won the game. I think Jason broke one, scored late in the game, took that game. And then, you had a little scare against Kennedy, which was shocking. I think you guys beat them only 12-0.
Yeah.
And, I think everybody was saying, okay, here comes the collapse. And then you guys come back against a very good Sacred Heart team. The Sacred Heart kid, I think, fumbled at the 5-yard line. And you guys pulled it out 14-12. And I think after that Sacred Heart game is when you guys really started to gel. The guys that were first-year starters were really starting to get the experience. And you guys really took off from there.
Yeah. But just going back to that Kennedy game and talking about Coach Hunt, you would have thought we'd lost that game. That's the memory I took from that one. I do remember, I think, like you said, I think Jason Tinney was banged up that week, didn't play. You don't want to say that you maybe have a little letdown, but I think that might have been what they call like a trap game or a little bit letdown game. We were in control the whole game. I don't think we're ever kind of in the jeopardy of losing the game, but we definitely wasn't the showing that we wished we had. And they let us know about that. And we definitely paid for that the next week in practice. And then we got back on track. That Sacred Heart game. Sacred Heart was a really talented team. They had a lot of players. Jason Iverson, I think DeAndre Freeman, some kids, Monty Coleman, Rob Goodrich, Dave Spag, kids I went to college with to this day, still talk about that game going back and forth. So that was an intense game. They were a really good team as well. Back at Municipal Stadium in the dirt on the baseball field again. And that was one of the games that brought fond memories to us. So we were able to escape that game. And then kind of just got back on track. And at that point, I think we felt like, okay, we got a little momentum going. Let's see if we can kind of keep it going, keep it continuing into the rest of the season.
Right. And, Mark, the Derby game, we're going to talk about that a little bit. It was the 75th game between the two teams. So it was a big day, at Ryan Field. And the thing I always took out of that game, Mark, is it was a shame that either team had to lose because both teams played tremendous, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And what I always remember about that game more than anything else is after, you guys had, sealed the win, you saw Tinney, Soldier, I think yourself, you guys all went up to Dave Van Roman, George Hay, and it was like a sign of respect. And
absolutely.
That to me told me a lot about, like, these kids were, they hated each other for that 48 minutes they played, but once the game was over, both teams had the utmost respect for the other. And I mean, just talk about, it was such a great game, Mark. So many, key moments, the Jason Sharkey interception early in the second quarter. And then you made a huge catch that, in all honesty, I think that's, your signature. You had so many great moments in Ansonia, but that'll always be your signature moment because Coach Hunt needed to get over that hump of beating Derby at Ryan Field. So talk about that whole experience that day.
Well, I mean, I think going back to realizing how important that game was. My first memory of that is I know I was feeling a little bit under the weather and somehow that got around. So I got a knock on my door. Again, it was a 10:30 start. So I got a knock on my door probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning with a parent bringing me some soup. So that's how I got the ball rolling. But I remember going over on the bus. They had us wear our helmets on the bus ride over from Nolan Field, to Ryan Field. I remember, just again, whether you're walking or you're driving, just seeing all the cars parked all the way down, and just getting back into the locker room that I was talking about and hearing the cleats on top and knowing that at that point, the records didn't mean anything. We were going to get the best shot that Derby had, and we expected it. And then, it came to realization. Again, I think, a lot of people in the stands, the weather wasn't great. It was a hard hitting game.
Yeah.
There was no trickery really going on too much that game. It was kind of just going back and forth, and we knew we were in for a battle, and we got it. And luckily, we were able to kind of squeak one out. I think it was 8-0 or so, but I think it was even closer than that. And there was a couple, things. The ball, couple rows could have went either way. We could have easily been on the other end of that. But that was definitely a memory and something. Getting Coach Hunt his first victory at Ryan Field, being part of that, I think was a great feeling for all of us.
Yeah, and I mean, Mark, like I said, you guys kind of coasted after that. You played Holy Cross again, and this time there was nothing left in doubt. You guys dominated the game. You clearly were head and shoulders better than them by then, and you won that NVL title. And you want to win a state title, no doubt about it. The ultimate goal, number one, has to be winning your league title, and that had to feel good to win a second league title in 3 years.
Yeah, it did, especially after losing that one to Holy Cross, to come back and regain the NVL championship. That's always one of the first goals, is to win the league and then get to the states and win that as well. So that's one thing that we can tip our hat on, is that we were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, and Mark, one thing about that 92 team that if I had to characterize them, I would definitely say heart, because New London was just a little better that year than you guys, and they were controlling the game, and you guys were down 21-7, and you did not quit. It looked like at the end New London was going to pull away, and then you guys scored 2 touchdowns at the end. I'll never forget Paris Edwards. It looked like he had dropped the ball, and then Jeff Press caught it, and you guys almost pulled that victory out. But what a game that was. And I mean, you guys really showed what kind of heart you had that day. And I even think Coach Hunt, even though you guys lost the game, he couldn't have asked for a better effort from you guys.
Yeah, unfortunately, we ended up on the short end of that stick. But I do remember, Jason Tinney played a big role in that, kind of putting us on his back to get us back in that game. I never watched the whole film, but I've seen a couple. Never was able to get myself to watch that whole film to this day, but seeing some highlights, he had a tremendous day, and I think that he, sparked us to kind of never give up. I think that's Ansonia football in general, is that you just keep pressing 40 minutes of football, and you play to the final whistle, and you never know what can happen. Unfortunately, we did run into a pretty good team that year. The Fletcher brothers were some good players.
Yeah.
That was a good team, and we came up on the short end of the stick. Unfortunately, we couldn't pull off what some of the other previous Ansonia teams that were able to do against those New London teams that were pretty stacked as well. So disappointing, but good memories. And like I said, I look back fondly and appreciate going to battle with the guys in blue on my sideline for those years.
And Mark, sometimes the captain, he has to kind of put his emotions to the side for the betterment of the team. And I'm sure Jeff Press was hurting after that loss, but he saw the way everybody was upset in the locker room. You had seniors crying, and he stood up and, said, "We have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm proud of you all." And I mean, he really showed what kind of captain he was, because he knew his teammates were hurting, his fellow seniors, and he decided, you know what, I've got to be a captain right now. I can't think about myself. And I really thought that was something that'll always stand out to me about Jeff Press as a captain and a player.
Yeah, and that was Jeff since Papa Warner. He's just by nature was a phenomenal football player and a leader. And even when I was, young and skinny, he was definitely one of the players that everyone looked up to, from Papa Warner. So it was no surprise that it carried over into high school. He was really solid leader, solid player. I know you didn't want to get hit by him. In drills, you always knew where Jeff was in those Oklahoma drills or those nutcracker drills.
Yeah.
Jeff was a great leader, a great player, another good solid guy.
Right. And, Mark, one thing a player always, they want to be successful no matter what. And, just having a good career is great. But, when you get, accolades after the season, it always feels good. And for you to make All NVL, I think you made it twice. You made All Valley twice, All Area, I think even All State. I mean, that had to be a great feeling for you, because I mean, at the end of the day, when you're putting all that work in all the time, and you're at practice every day, and then you're in the games, and you're putting your body on the line. It does feel good to be recognized for what you accomplish on the field.
Yeah, it might have softened the blow of losing those state championships a little bit, but probably not enough. So in the big scheme of things, that's the thing that you really play for, especially when you put that A on your chest. But it was nice. I think that what I remember most about that is even thinking back to like the pictures that were taken. So like you said, you go to battle with against Dave and Roman for all those years, and then you get to take a picture with them at the end of the year and kind of shake each other's hands. So looking back even on some of those, all teams, and being able to sit down with some of the same players that they work just as hard as you, they practice just as long as you. There's always a ball could roll one way that separates winning and losing. So I think that part of kind of just getting everybody in the same room, and kind of at that point, kind of exhaling from the season and kind of being able to shake each other's hands and just be around a different set of guys that could be in the same locker room. And I think that was the part that I remember the most was going to like the pictures for those, and being able to kind of see other people without the face mask on, what they really look like underneath. That's what I remember the most about that was actually being around the other guys that from the other towns and the other areas that got some of the same accolades.
Right. So Mark, talk to me about college. You talked about how you tried to play both, but it was just not really possible. It wasn't realistic. Ultimately, what made you decide to choose the one over the other? Just talk about that a little bit.
Well, I remember that. I know I think my freshman year we had like a 5 or 6 hour bus ride up to Norwich, Vermont. And then I think the next morning was baseball. Baseball started the next morning. So at that point, I said, you know what? I'm just as much as I want to do this, I think I'm just going to sit this out and focus on football. But like I said, that's definitely one of my biggest regrets was not. If I could do it over again, I definitely would have kind of got up and joined that baseball team as well. But football at that point, like I said, I had just fallen in love with it, emotionally, and the camaraderie and the feeling of the goosebumps on your arm and the fans in baseball aren't the same as the fans in football. So that little bit different. I love both sports, but that was kind of what edged me to just. And to be honest with you, if baseball would have came first, it might have been the opposite. But I think the fall comes before the spring and the summer, so it just happens to be that I played football in college before baseball season came around. But up to that point, I know even on my recruiting visits, I was planning on playing both sports until that point. But
right. And
hindsight is 20/20, as they say.
Right. And let me ask you, what was the big difference you noticed from being a high school football player to being a college player? What would you say was the biggest difference that you had to adjust to when you got to college?
The time commitment, definitely. It's a whole different ball game in college. There's meetings about meetings, and there's the weight room, and there's films, and there's 6 a.m. films, and then class. So it was just 3 a days. Going into my freshman year in college, just going into having triples every day. Like I said, the rules were a little bit different. The physicality was a little bit different. So it was a lot more intense and strenuous, I think, and just time commitment wise for college football compared to high school football. But I think Ansonia prepared me really well. Like I said, going back to bring that sophomore year up again, when I was kind of the scout team running back, I got beat up pretty good that year. And I remember going into my freshman year, I took a couple shots early in camp, and I was like, well, this is nothing compared to, what I went against my sophomore year, getting hit by, Dennis Tinney, Sean Thomas, and Robbie Clark every day. So when I got to college, it was kind of all downhill from my Ansonia high school scout team experience. So, that's something that stuck with me as well. So another example of paying your dues that'll pay off in the long run.
Right. So Mark, let me ask you, and you played football 12 years, I believe, 11 or 12 years. Mm-hmm. You've obviously played baseball a long time, and you were successful at both of them, especially, in the high school level. What would you say, though, if you had to pick one thing, what was most rewarding to you about either sport, if you had to pick one thing? The
relationships from the locker room. Absolutely. I just even high school, college, the laughing, the teasing, the jokes, those are things that you just can't get in, a lot of other areas in life. And the relationships that you make that to this day, you don't see somebody for years and you bump into them and it's like a time machine. It brings you right back to those days. So I think absolutely the camaraderie, the relationships, the literally blood, sweat, and tears that you guys do together, that kind of makes a quote unquote band of brothers. Kind of relationships last a lifetime. And I'm not sure that you can get that from a lot of other areas outside of football.
Right. So Mark, let me ask you this, a two-part question. If there was one person that you could get to be teammates with for one game, high school or college, whatever it is, who would it be? And number two, who's the one player that you never got to play against that you would have liked to play against?
Oh, so if I could go back and be teammates, that's a tough question. Question. I think just growing up with the teams, I don't know if I could single out one person. I just think when I was a little kid, growing up with those 80 teams from Ansonia, like those 87 team, and
James
to
Lane,
me, exactly. James, to me, Fran Hendricks was my guy.
Awesome.
Growing up. He lived on my block. I remember, having in Pop Warner having my full pads on, and we would just be playing in the backyard, and he would just be, throwing us around like a rag doll with our pads on. So he was somebody that I think a lot of us looked up to. But just those teams in general, like I said, a lot of people would pretend that they were, somebody from the NFL. But when we were growing up in the street, we were, those Ansonia High School early 80s. And I just like to thank, Mr. Lally, for bringing me to a lot of those games. The memories I have, the NVL championships where they were giving sneakers out in the stands because it was frozen, or looking at Applebee's Cavs from Torrington and them being bigger than life, and Jeff Capola, and I could throw out names forever. Being in practice and making a good catch, and the coaches being like, "Well, that was a good catch, but you're not McNamara, or you're not Glenn Antrim, or you're not you're not a Hearn." So those are just things that were thrown at us over the years that kind of just kept you grounded and kept you focused. So just to be a part of it, even in the stands, even in on the sideline as a Pop Warner kid playing Pop Warner off to the side and looking up and seeing the high school kids play. It was an unbelievable experience from the time that I can remember. Before I was even playing Pop Warner, just to be part of, Ansonia football, Valley football in general. So I just think, just being around it from a small kid up until this day, bringing my kids back to Nolan Field to watch a game, and letting them get a little taste of it, or showing the old film of, 12,000 people in the stands, which is a little bit different. That's what I would go back to. But I would still like to catch a fade or two from Richie Lester. If I can do it again.
Right. Well, Mark, this was a lot of fun. Number one, congratulations on a great career. I always said those early 90s were the best times for me watching high school football. And you were a tremendous two-way player, and, you always seem to come up with that big play. That's what I always remember. And I really do applaud you for the type of work you did when you were on the field. You were definitely a coach on the field, and guys like yourself, Greg Soldra, Jason Tinney, Dave Pacheco, all those guys, you guys really always left it all out there when you played, and you guys were friends. That's what I always remember the most. And I really do congratulate you, and I really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the invite, and thank you for providing, this opportunity to others as well, because I think we all enjoy kind of, hearing other stories from other people. And I think it's a great opportunity. And I think we all thank you for doing this as well.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Folks, I've said this many times, and I just said it to Mark, that, those 90 teams were some of the best times in high school football. He touched on it a little bit. You had the Ansonia kids who were at Dutchess. You had the Derby kids who were at McDonald's. But one thing that was probably the most awesome thing about it was just a great time to be a high school kid. You felt like a rock star, and these guys were rock stars. And a kid like Mark Gesner, folks, he may not have been the quote unquote superstar on some of these teams on paper, but man, could that kid catch the ball? Could that kid tackle? He could do it all. And he kind of did it so effortlessly. And his teammates, Greg Soldier, Jason Tinney, Dave Pacheco, Sean Thomas, all these guys. I mean, these guys knew how to win. And maybe they weren't what you call the most talented against, some of the bigger teams, but they knew how to win. They knew how to play together. And that's why they were champions. And that's really what high school football was about in the Valley. And you could especially say that about Ansonia because they've always been, right up there at the top, pretty much for the entire 20th century and now to the 21st century. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.